This is a tough one. My name is Salim. I'm Palestinian and I grew up there. And I just watched Casey Neistat's video titled Jew. And it left me feeling very upset and angry with the narrative and framing he used to tell the story. Now, I'm a huge Casey fan. I grew up watching his vlogs. He inspired me to get onto YouTube and tell stories. So I wanted to respond and send a message to you, Casey. You start your story by talking about Birthright, which is a free trip for Jews all over the world to come visit Palestine and settle there. I was there when you visited in 2005. I was in high school. We just came out of one of the most violent periods in recent history. And as someone who was born in Jerusalem, I can't go there without the issuance of an Israeli military permit. But you, as someone who grew up in America, are able to come and visit any part of the land which is then not accessible to me. And this is part of the system, I think, and the context which you failed to really talk about in your video that I wanted to address. Because it's a system of segregation, system of rights given based on your ethnicity. And as a Palestinian, I have minimal rights compared to someone who didn't even grow up in that land. And there are millions of Palestinians all over the world who can't come home, even for a visit, because that system of segregation doesn't allow them to. Casey, the first two things I wanted to address are these notions that this is complex or that this started thousands of years ago. Those are both not true. This started almost 100 years ago with the colonization of Palestine, driven by an ideology that promoted that there was a people without a land and a land without a people that needed to be settled. But there were a people. There were Palestinians. They were the native indigenous population of Palestine. And the creation of Israel was driven by this colonial mentality. And so I'm not denying the relationship or the historic religious relationship Jews have to the land, but this is not a religious or ethnic conflict. This is a political one. This is a one of colonization, of settler colonization. And that brings me to the other point I wanted to make, which is violence didn't start a few days ago. Violence is a product of a system of colonialism that has dominated for the last 100 years. And while that might sound abstract, to make it more tangible and concrete for you, and that means the killing of Palestinians, the subjugation of Palestinians, the imprisonment of Palestinians, the beating of Palestinians, the putting them in a siege for 16, 17 years where you control every single aspect of life, from how much food goes in, to how much water goes in, to how much electricity goes in, to bombing them relentlessly and suffocating them for generations, to taking over land, to promoting fascist ideology. And this is only accelerated over the last few years as now openly declared fascists have been taking over Israeli politics. That's the reality. I wake up every day to the news of Palestinian children that have been killed by the Israeli army when they have incursions into their homes, into their towns, into their villages, into their cities. This is a daily occurrence, Casey. We get ripped out of bed and imprisoned. Children are ripped out of bed and imprisoned almost on a daily basis. This is the violence that this system produces. And the system will continue to reproduce that violence until we address it for what it is. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens over decades of oppression, of domination, of taking away any semblance of human dignity, freedom, and for people. That's what this is about. And that brings me back to this idea that people are violent because they hate Jews, which was a very strong theme of your video throughout. Anti-Semitism is wrong. All forms of hate are wrong. There's a fundamental difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Zionism is the ideology that has materially and tangibly made my life worse and made the life of millions of Palestinians worse for generations. So when you rebel, when you resist against anything, it is this ideology that has fueled colonialism and your oppression for so long. And the other part of the video, Casey, that I think was incredibly irresponsible was using examples and stories that have been proven to be wrong and untrue. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, you're putting forward to your platform misinformation and disinformation about rape, mutilation, and all kinds of horrific crimes that have been proven to be not true, that have not been substantiated or corroborated by the press. But the problem is, in these moments of hysteria, people are willing to believe and print and promote really vile things. And I understand where it comes from. It comes from a place of trauma and anger at the violence that you're experiencing. But to promote these things is dangerous and fuels the levels of hate that are about to come. And this is not just being done by you, Casey. It's being done by the majority of the Western press. It's being done by President Biden in his speeches, talking about 40 babies that have been beheaded, which was based on a fake report that has proven to be fake. I mean, this is the leader of the major superpower in the world. Every politician, every news outlet in the West is coming out with this narrative that is incredibly harmful and dangerous, and is developing this association with Palestinians as barbaric, as vile, as dangerous. This narrative is now giving Israel the cover and the green light to commit atrocities and massacres in Gaza. This is what's happening when you spread propaganda and misinformation. You create an alternative reality that people believe, and that will lead to death. And when you talk about the courage to speak out, Casey, the majority of the West, whether it's politicians or it's media, have come out with strong statements of supporting Israel without mentioning the context of violent colonialism, settler colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing that we've been dealing with for almost 100 years. The higher power structure of the world is on your side. I want to live in a world without violence. I want to live in a world without death. I want to live in a world where there's freedom and liberty and equality and rights for everyone. But to do that, Casey, you can't talk about peace without addressing the fundamental injustice that underlies it. And so, as we've chanted many summers ago, there's no justice, no peace. To stem everything that is terrible about this starts with taking on this system that will produce and reproduce violence until we build something else. And I hope we can have a conversation about this one day, Casey. Thank you for listening.